All right, welcome back to the CBS Sports College Basketball YouTube page. My name is Kyle Boone, aka Strong Jaw, and we're talking NBA draft today. I'm joined by the one, the only, Adam Finklestein and Mr. Fink. We're coming off Combine Week in Chicago. Let's just talk some ball. Let's talk some
Let's do
developments
it.
from the week that was. We're gonna keep this
I'd
pretty
appreciate
casual.
it if you got your better alias though, which is nicest man in America. That's more accurate. But carry on. Yeah.
The strongest jaw in America here with you, along with Mr. Adam Finkelstein. First things first, Fink. I mean, we kicked off Combine Week with a total stunner. Atlanta, with just a 3.0% chance of winning the number one pick, won the lottery, did exactly that. Fink, put your hat on. If you're Landry Fields holding the number one pick right now, which direction are you leaning? And don't you dare say I'm trading that pick.
Well, I am trading that pick. In fact, I'm trading everything. Let's be clear. I am trading everything. It's not working. You're in the luxury tax. You're 10 games below 500. If this isn't an indication that it is time to start from scratch, I don't know what is. But all that aside, I would say it's a really interesting narrative right now because I think that the draft media community has kind of settled in on Alex Sarr as the number one pick. And so obviously that's the place where we need to start. But I'm not convinced at all that this is a no-brainer, even though this is now just about where everybody is mocking is Alex Sarr to Atlanta. Certainly that's where you have to start doing your due diligence. But I just really struggle with someone who, you're betting on the shooting, and the shooting, as we saw at the Combine, is not a guarantee. He's got a narrow build. He's not the physical force you would want at the center position in terms of being a lob threat or a rim runner, although he's very mobile and the defensive upside is significant. Doesn't rebound like you would like. So there's just a lot of ifs for a number one pick, and that's representative of this draft. But suffice it to say, if I'm in this pick and I can't trade it, I'm starting with Alex Sarr, but I am casting a wide net and I am doing due diligence on probably 6 or 7 guys, to be totally honest.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. I think Alex Sarr is kind of falling in as the most projected number one pick in this class, just because I think fit makes a lot of sense. And I know you don't do big boards, Adam Finkelstein. However, is the Alex Sarr pick maybe like just people thinking, oh well, maybe he's the best prospect, but he's definitely the best fit? Or is it like, oh, he's definitely the best prospect and also he'd be a nice fit for Atlanta? Because I feel like in this draft class, you've got Reece Shea, you've got Stephon Castle, you've got Donovan Clingan. Like there's a lot of guys at the top of this draft who I think could reasonably make a case to go number one in this draft. And Sarr, maybe it's a little bit of groupthink, but I think a lot of people are just kind of penciling that in, and I'm not entirely sure that's the case.
Yeah, I think it is a little bit of groupthink, but I think it's also rooted in some logic, and that is the fact that you're talking about a mobile 7-footer who should really project defensively. Even though I don't think he's the rim protector that some assume yet. You hear the narrative being that he's got a chance to be a difference maker defensively, and so you assume he's a shot blocker because he's 7 feet tall. But I think his biggest value is in the mobility, is in his ability to get out and move his feet away from the basket, be able to defend pick and roll in multiple coverages, maybe even be somewhat switchable. If you're watching the NBA playoffs right now, you see a lot of centers guarding, kind of like non-scoring guards, just some peculiar matchups, at least by kind of typical historical NBA standards. And Sarr's a guy who would allow you all that kind of defensive creativity. So I get why people like him. And in a draft where there is no clear high upside prospect, it does make sense to say who's got the highest floor, and a 7-footer who projects defensively does. But it's not a no-brainer. And I don't think we should be treating it like a no-brainer, and I don't think Atlanta should be treating it like a no-brainer. And I think they and we should all be doing our due diligence and asking ourselves if there's somebody that's got a better chance to pop long term.
Do you think you're kind of the evaluator, the guy who really gets into the nitty gritty of kind of projecting guys very early in their careers, and obviously you're really good with the NBA draft. But do you think we're evaluating Alex Sarr correctly? Because you see, he's 7 foot tall, he plays the center position, he's listed as a center. do we think he's a center? Because well, I watched some of his film. He does a lot of things that maybe traditional centers don't do, but also I think the shot is a real question, as we saw kind of in Chicago. So like there's a lot of like upside with him, and I can talk myself into him being the number one prospect in this class, and I certainly have already done that. I'm just not entirely sure like through which lens we should be looking through to try and like project Alex Sarr. Like, what is he going to be at the NBA level? What do you think? Maybe not a comp, but like, how is he going to impact winning at the NBA level?
So again, it starts with the defense, and the mobility and things like that. But where you have a real hard time is with the physicality right now. And it's not, this is not just like, hey, he's got to get stronger. This is questions about like his frame is a more narrow one naturally. And listen, on the heels of Wemby and Chet, two guys who have obviously had those same questions and overcome them pretty glaringly. I know there's going to be pushback on that narrative about, questions about his frame. But let's be very clear that Alex Sarr is not Chet, and he's certainly not Wemby. And that conversation shouldn't even be had. Like that's not a relevant counterpoint. That's not a fair counterpoint. So I am concerned about the frame and the positional implications of it, especially right away. He's certainly going to get stronger. The NBA is as good as it gets in terms of maximizing players' frames. But right now, is he physical enough to guard a 5, even though the NBA has trended away from the low post game? I don't know about that because I think it impacts him in other areas. I think he gets bumped off his spots, not just in the half court, but even as a rim runner. So that's a concern. But at the 4, I think he's mobile enough to guard a 4, but how does he impact your spacing on the offensive end? Because he does not shoot it right now. We're hoping he shoots it in the future, and that could unlock a higher upside. But right now he doesn't shoot it. So if he's next to a 5 who doesn't shoot it, that really limits you offensively to have both front court guys be unable to stretch the floor. So I do think there are concerns there. And the other thing I'll say is that if you're taking this guy number 1, even if a normal draft, he would be somewhere between 8 and 12, which I believe, you got to play him. It doesn't make sense to draft him and then not invest the time on the floor to try and develop that asset. So you got to figure out what position he is or what position he can get those minutes right away. I think ultimately he can play some time at 4 and 5. I think 5's his best position, but a lot of it's going to depend on the matchups.
Yeah. I think that's pretty interesting. There's a lot of kind of nuance in evaluating every prospect, of course, but Sarr, I think in particular, is really interesting. Coming off of Combine Week, Fink, let's recap maybe the most buzzy name from Combine Week. That was Bronny James. Lot of hubbub made about his appearance at
the people like to talk about Bronny. I wasn't aware of that. Yeah,
I don't know. Maybe they're tuning us out already. And we'll breeze through it here, but I think we should recap at least his week from Chicago. Sure. Checked in. Height was only 6'1", smaller than expected, but I think for NBA guys or evaluators, yeah, like that's that was kind of to be expected. But I think he showed out for the most part and had overall a good week. He finished second in the 3-point shooting star drill. Looked good in the second final day of scrimmages. Where are you at on Bronny James right now as a prospect? Is he a real prospect? Or are we making too much of a couple of solid but not spectacular days in Chicago?
I will say this. I thought his performance at the NBA Combine reminded me quite a bit of the McDonald's All-American game from a year ago when the narrative was very much the same. It was, does he really belong here, or is he here because he is LeBron James's son and because of all that comes with that in terms of the likes, the clicks, everybody, the amount of interest that goes into being Bronny James. However, I think like the McDonald's game a year ago, he showed that he belonged. Now, and what I mean by that is it wasn't glaring like this guy does not belong on the floor. And let's face it, there are some guys that did seem like out of place in this setting. So I thought he held his own. I thought that he was much better in Wednesday's game than in Tuesday. I thought the athletic testing was a positive. The height was what I expected. I don't think most people doubted that he was not the 6'4" that USC listed him at this year. That was obviously a little bit of an embellishment, but 6'1.5" without shoes, which makes him functionally with shoes on somewhere about 6'2.5". So I thought it was solid, but listen, you can't separate the fact that Bronny James is LeBron James's son. The fact of the matter is that's why he was there. Whether or not he proved he belonged is one thing, but if his name was Joe Smith and not the old Maryland forward, he wouldn't have been there, given the numbers he put up as a freshman at USC. That's just the reality of the situation. The other reality of the situation is it impacts his draft status. It impacts who is interested in him. It always has, and to say that being LeBron's son doesn't impact it is just disingenuous. It's going to impact the teams who are interested in him. It's going to impact the teams that his agency wants to be interested in him. So it's just like, I really respect how he's approached this. I thought he handled his media session tremendously well. I was so impressed with the way he handled those questions. But the reality is there's only so much separation he's going to be able to get from his dad. And a lot of that is because of the way his dad has talked about him over the last 3 years and about his desire to play with him. And his dad even talked about him again this week, coming out of the combine with his podcast with JJ Redick. They were back on talking about Bronny. So Bronny's going to be in the news, probably inevitably, but especially when LeBron continues to keep him in the news.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. And you look at his kind of counting stats from his freshman season at USC, and I think there's some legitimacy to questioning, whether or not he's an NBA prospect. I don't think he would have been at the combine, if his name was not Bronny James. But this is someone who I think will probably end up being drafted, and whether or not and like whether or not you believe that Bronny is a prospect, like an NBA player, might not matter all that much. Like, I actually believe that he could be an NBA player at some point. I don't think he should come out this year, to be clear. Like, coming off of what he did at USC, he was not impactful. Was basically out of the rotation. Like, not a guy who impacted winning for USC. USC did not do much winning to begin with. Maybe that was a reflection of the Andy Enfield era at USC. I mean, Isaiah Collier didn't exactly light the world on fire either. So, but I do think, if you're looking at kind of evaluating prospects and projecting long term, you have to look at it kind of like currency. Like, you may be buying Bronny James long term, and maybe you're buying Bronny right now when his stock is not super high. But imagine, I think there's a world in which he goes back to college. He averages 10 points and 5 assists per game next season for, I don't know, USC, or he averages 15 and 6 for Duquesne, something like that. And then I think the conversation shifts a little bit around Bronny. So this week, I think at Chicago, at the combine, I think maybe legitimized his draft status in a way that, I think a lot of people were just kind of speculating before, like, okay, he's going to be picked because his name is Bronny James. I think if he is picked, that may have something to do with it. It may have all to do with it. But I think there's a real case that you could talk yourself into Bronny, investing in him, putting him in your G League program, and kind of developing that talent long term. So it's going to be interesting, I guess, to see what happens with Bronny James. But I think it was overall a good week from Bronny James. That's enough on Bronny James, Adam Finklestein.
There is a reason we call you the nicest man in America, my friend.
I'm trying to, like, I know there's a lot of nuance with Bronny James is all I'm saying. Like,
the other thing I'll add just real quick, because I think this is a really important part of the context, is we got to remember he was coming off that cardiac issue. He missed the entire preseason. And as we assess his freshman season, that's obviously a huge, huge thing. And it would not be, listen, I've never co-signed the one and done lottery pick hype that was going on a year ago. I think more of a realist than most on what his stock is now. Having said that, it is not fair to judge him on his season without acknowledging the impact, even of which we don't understand the full scope of what he went through in the summer and missing the months leading up to the season.
Yeah, for sure. All right, that's enough Bronny James talk. Let's talk some actual winners from Combine Week. I know Bronny James probably falls in that category, but who stood out to you during Combine Week from Chicago? I think some guys who maybe tested better than expected, did better in interviews than you expected, played better than you expected. You could take this any way you go, name as many or as few as you would like from winners from Combine Week.
So as someone who has been continually surprised by Reed Sheppard, I, hand in the air, was not expecting him to measure with the highest vertical leap in the Combine.
No kidding. Yep.
42-inch. And I think he tied with 2 other players, but I wasn't expecting that. So I think in terms of the physical testing, Reed Sheppard was someone who came away a winner. I think Devin Carter came away a winner. His physical testing, I think he tied Reed with that 42-inch vertical, but it was the totality of his athletic measurements that were really glaring. Only measured at 6'2.5" without shoes on, so that wasn't great, but had the wingspan to overcome that, or to compensate for that, I should say. And again, with him, he's just so competitive. I think he's the most competitive guy in the draft, so he plays bigger than he is. Those were 2 of the players that really stood out in the physical testing. Was there anybody you liked in the physical testing before we talk about the 5-on-5? Was there any numbers that really popped to you?
Oh man, Devin Carter for sure.
Yeah.
The 42-inch max standing vert was impressive. I believe he set an NBA Combine record for his 3/4 court sprint.
Yes.
Which was really good. Zach Edey's numbers, I think, were pretty impressive. You kind of stack them up against some of the other centers in this class, like Donovan Clingan, Yves Missi, even Alex Sarr. Like, I thought he performed well. Obviously, there's some memes out there from his 3/4 court sprint,
but yeah.
Absolutely. But it was a good week, I think, for Zach Edey as well. Somehow grew half an inch, which I thought was impossible. But Zach Edey, the tallest player from the Combine last year, measured half-inch taller this year. Again, was the tallest player at the NBA Combine.
Can I interject in that real quick? Real quick.
Yeah.
You know what I liked about Zach Edey? The shooting drills. Like, I'm watching the shooting drills and the clips coming from it, and I was like, I think this guy's touch goes out to the 3-point line. And it's like wide open rhythm set shot threes. But like, I think there's we're talking a lot about Donovan Clingan's shooting potential, and rightfully so. I think he's going to be able to shoot long term. I think there's a chance Zach Edey can make threes down the road. I mean, there's some guys who make shots at the Combine because they've been nothing but drilling it for the last 2 months, but it just doesn't look good. Zach Edey's, like, it looked pretty fluid. Like, I was kind of like, maybe this can be a thing down the road. But I just wanted to interject that quick while you were talking about him.
Fink, come to the dark side, my man. This is Edey corner. I've been buying and believing in Zach Edey. I saw him at the Combine last year, and I watched kind of his like pro day performance, and it's hard to kind of figure out how much stock, if any, to put into those performances because you're literally performing against nobody. It's just a workout.
And it's something you researched.
Exactly. Yes. But I thought the 3-point shot last year at the Combine was pretty convincing. And talking with people in Chicago last year, I think there was like a little bit more buzz about Zach Edey than maybe people wanted to acknowledge. And I think a lot of people probably wrote him off as a prospect just because, he's 7'4" and maybe doesn't move the same way that, most traditional centers do. And maybe his game at the college level looks a little bit more old school than what we see at the NBA level. But I'm with you. Like, I actually think the shot looks pretty good. We'll see if it translates. We'll see if kind of he's able to stay on the floor and defend in space at the NBA level. But yeah. But
can he play? We know he's going to be a drop coverage big. Can he play drop coverage and not let people get behind him? I go back to that national championship game. Those 2 lob dunks that Samson Johnson had to start the second half. That is a microcosm of what teams are concerned about.
Yes, absolutely. But definitely, I thought it was a good week for him overall. I've got a dinner bet with Tim Doyle from HQ going that I think he's going to be a first rounder. Doyle does not believe he will be taken inside the top 30 picks. So I've already been shopping. Like, I'm looking at some nice steakhouses here in Tulsa. Maybe some seafood or something. I believe I will be proven correct. Feeling a little bit more confident after this week. I'm not entirely sure if I'm in an NBA GM. I'm taking him with the top 30 pick, but I think you could talk yourself into it in this draft class in particular, like somewhere between 20 and 30. someone is going to, I think, just talk themselves into seeing what happens and developing him. He's got a great work ethic. Was the best player in college basketball the last 2 years. There's a lot to like, and I think it was a good week for him overall. Let's talk some losers here, Fink. Some guys who maybe didn't test as well. Yeah. I'll start.
You start.
I'll name
Yeah,
a
you
few.
start.
Who maybe didn't test well, didn't play well, whatever the case may be. I'll go with Peyton Sandfort.
No,
And I wrote kind of some winners and losers
took the
recap
words
for
right out of
CBS
my mouth.
Sports.
Yeah.
And some Iowa people kind of caught on to that and highlighted a few things that I wrote in that story, including that I believe he had more air balls than made shots during the scrimmage section both days at the combine, which, I wasn't highlighting to poke fun. It's just it was just an observation that I had. It felt like he was a little bit out of his depth. The shooting, I think, is like the one skill that people think is very translatable for Peyton Sandfort, and when you don't shoot it particularly well, kind of against some of your peers, I thought that was not great, probably for his draft stock. And so yeah, like he was probably like late second round grade for me. I think some people even had him, like mid to late first round. I don't think that's the case anymore.
Late first round buzz going into the combine for sure.
Yeah. So yeah, like I'm not out on Peyton Sandfort again. Like
he's got to go back to school. I mean, I think he's got to go back to school. He can go back to school and become more of a focal point there. But everything you said about the shooting is right on. Like if you're a knockdown shooter, you shouldn't have glaringly bad misses. But the other variable there is the shooting is what, the theory on Peyton Sandfort is you're willing to live with the challenges he has defending the ball because of the shooting, because of the overall intellect, the passing, the belief that he'd be in the right spots as a help side defender. But what stood out to me was just, giving up straight line drives in that setting. Now, let me be clear. I think Peyton Sandfort is an NBA prospect. I think it's very possible if he says, you know what, I know I didn't have a good combine, but I want to go to the NBA right now, and I'm going to go. And somebody could develop him, and he could become a functional NBA player because he's a better shooter than he looked. He's a smart player. He's got good size. I think actually he's a very good shooter. But the combine was not a good reflection of the best version of himself, and I think it put him in a position where if he wants to be in consideration for the first round, he needs to go back to school.
Yeah. I think that's pretty well put. I talked to Sandfort at the combine in Chicago after one of the scrimmages, and kind of asked him like, what are some of the challenges that you're facing? Like, how do you evaluate yourself and facing off against NBA level competition? And he basically said he was pretty honest in saying like, not necessarily, hey, I struggled, but it was more like adjusting to this level of play is really difficult. It is definitely a step up. And essentially said like the jump from college, which obviously he's been at Iowa, to the NBA combine was equivalent to the jump that he made from high school to college. So there's going to be an adjustment period. Obviously, I think that happens for every single NBA prospect, unless you're Victor Wembanyama, apparently. But I'm still like, I think Peyton Sandfort, absolutely. I agree with you. He's still an NBA prospect. It wasn't a great week for him though. So I'm curious to see kind of what his decision looks like and how maybe this past week impacted him. One more loser I'll throw at you, Fink, and you can tell me whether I'm off base or not.
I had two, so don't take mine. Go ahead. Who you got?
I got Rob Dillingham. Is that Yeah, let's talk about Rob Dillingham because I don't really know exactly how much stock to put into it. But he's only 6'1" without shoes and 164.2 pounds on the scale. Is that concerning? Is that, should we actually be adjusting our ranks and projections based off, just how he measured? Because he's a fantastic basketball player. He's very fun to watch on offense. But I think there's some real concerns there with, the size, the frame, how he measured, and then kind of evaluating what he did on defense at Kentucky.
Well, let's first acknowledge that there's already a wide range of opinions on Rob Dillingham out there. And the people who are most enthusiastic about him are really buying into the offensive skill set and how dynamic he can be. And based on what he did this year at Kentucky, like rightfully so. The people who are more skeptical of him are really concerned about the defense. Regardless of where you fall on that scale, the testing numbers are relevant. Like 6'1", 164 pounds, like that's relevant no matter what you think of him. Now, I will say, as someone who, like, I don't envision that I would mock or would rank Rob in the top 5 of this draft. I do think there are some outcomes where he becomes a top 5 player in this draft. And let me explain the difference. I think the likelihood of that is lower than it might be for 5 other guys, say. And for me, it's really about the defense. And this is someone who exceeded my expectations this year at Kentucky, who matured in so many great ways, who showed a dynamic quality about him offensively, with his shot making, with his handle, with his flair, like the ability to kind of want the ball and want to make the big shot in the big moments. But defensively, if you go look at his synergy profile, I think he was in the bottom 1%. And just to explain what that means, like, it means that 99% of college basketball rated as a better defender than he did. And then you add to that he's undersized and really just weak right now. That's relevant. How you evaluate and weigh those variables will be a team by team, person by person exercise. But you can't. You have to acknowledge that it is at least a consideration.
No, I think that's probably right. And in this class, I don't want to kind of join the chorus of everyone else saying this draft class stinks, because I think there's some good prospects in here. Maybe there's not some future all-stars, but I think I like this class. But I do think
those two things can coexist, though. I think it could be a bad class and simultaneously have someone who is going to emerge unexpectedly. Because if you look at draft history, every draft has someone that is going to emerge unexpectedly. You can go back 10 years, and whether he's the 37th pick or the 18th pick, someone comes out. The point of why this is a down draft is because we don't have anyone at the top of the draft that we feel good about saying is a probable all-star. So those sleepers haven't revealed themselves yet. So I think those two things, I think both of those things can be true at the same time. This can be a bad draft, and yet someone is going to emerge out of this and be an all-star.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And I think people probably are looking for stars. They're like hungry and desperate for stars. And when you watch Rob Dillingham on offense, it's like, oh man, this shades of Kyrie. Like, he looks very fantastic on offense. He's very energetic, can be kind of a microwave bench scorer for you, and maybe a lot more. Like, his playmaking, I think, was really impressive and improved at Kentucky. There's a lot to like there. I still have him inside the top 13, but I did move him down from 8 to 13. I think you have to adjust expectations, maybe just a little bit off the measurements. And what we learned from Combine Week,
and that's right. He won't go any. I don't think he goes any lower than that. So I think you and
I agree.
Somewhere in that range, I think is very fair.
Yeah, somewhere between like 5 and the end of the lottery is probably his range. 13 is probably closer to his floor, I would say. Let's wrap here. One guy or two guys who you feel like you're higher on than most, either from talking to people in Chicago or just kind of seeing kind of how the dust has settled from Combine Week. You've noticed like, hey, I actually like believe in this guy a lot more than maybe some of my peers do, or maybe some guys in the NBA believe. I'll go first here because like I have Devin Carter at number 9 on my big board right now. And I think that's probably higher than most. And it may even be like a slight overreaction to what I saw in Combine Week. But this dude is like an alpha. And I loved what I saw on the floor. Obviously, this past season at Providence, he was the best player in the Big East. But the way he carries himself is so much fun. He always thinks he's the best player on the floor. But I think realistically, like when you're projecting him into the NBA, he's a winner. He's someone who's, I think, going to be a great defensive prospect. We've seen that throughout his time at in college, but also
Yeah.
we've seen some improvement as a shooter. And so I think if you can kind of pair that improved offensive game, the playmaking, the shooting, with an elite kind of defensive perimeter defender, I really like what I see. And I think there's like a very, very safe floor to project Devin Carter as a top 10 prospect in this class. Is there anyone that stands out to you as like someone you definitely believe more in than maybe some of the other draft community?
I'm still betting on Ron Holland. I feel like people have moved off that one. I mean, he was someone that we finished as the top prospect in last year's high school class. And to be clear, that was because he was hyper competitive. He was an athlete. It wasn't necessarily because we saw all kinds of alpha star potential. It was because last year's high school class, which has turned into a precursor for this year's draft, didn't have obvious stars. And with Ignite this year, I was able to see him live twice. We were able to go out to their facility in Las Vegas in October and watch some of the workouts ahead of training camp. And then I saw him at the showcase in Orlando in December. And my takeaway in both of those settings was this guy has gotten notably better from the player that we saw in high school. And candidly, can't say that for everyone. You know, when we go through the top prospects in last year's high school class, who are now very widely considered to be first round prospects in this year's draft, I can't point to where they were last year and say, okay, they were here and now they're here. With Ron Holland, I can. And I know the numbers didn't pop. I think there's some things, defensively, we really thought he had a high upside. And I still think that. What I saw in December was that it's just going to take a little bit of time in terms of him adjusting to guarding NBA style schemes. You know, lots of times he had the physical markers and he had the motor. He was just maybe a half second late. I think some of that stuff is going to take care of itself with reps, given how hard he plays, given his energy level, given his level of competitiveness. I think the shooting, it's been a question mark forever. But I think the shooting made some nice strides this year. And I think long term, this is someone who is going to be able to make spot up, standstill threes. And we know he's going to be able to get out in transition. If he gets to the point where people have to run him off the line and close out hard, just on open spot up shots, it's going to open up some driving lanes. So he is a player that I still have in my top 5 going into this year's draft. And again, I just think that we're not, like, if you said to me in a vacuum, Alex Sarr, Ron Holland, and I know this is a contrarian take, like I really, really, really got to think about that one for a while. I recognize, again, that is not where most people are at, but Ron Holland remains someone that I am higher on than most.
I love it. Same wavelength. He's number 4 on the CBS Sports Big Board, by the way. So we may think a lot alike in some ways that maybe I did not expect. Lower on someone who you feel like you're lower on than consensus. I will start here again because I would like your thoughts. I have Yves Missi at number 22. I've seen him like somewhere between 10 and 20 for the most part in this class. There's a lot of guys who maybe I'm higher on just in general that have pushed Missi down. Like I have, Dylan Jones as a top 20 prospect, Carlton Carrington, Bub Carrington at number 20. Is there what am I missing with Yves Missi? Like, am I overthinking it and thinking like, the tools, the flashes that he showed at Baylor are going to translate? Like, how high are you taking Yves Missi, and do I have him? Am I wrong at number 22?
I think that's about right. But I think that once you get 15 to 35, 15 to 40, I think you can sort those in a variety of different ways. And right now, because the amount of groupthink that goes into some of the draft coverage, it seems like it's this huge flyer. But I think on draft night, there's always surprises. So I think the thing with Yves is that he's got a very obvious translatable role as a rim running lob threat who can block shots and is pretty mobile. So for me, he's one of those guys that you can kind of say with some clarity, like, okay, this is the role we see him playing in the NBA. If he's anything beyond that, the upside becomes significantly higher. And if for some reason he's not able to fulfill that role, then it becomes lower. But I just think there's less of a range for him of potential outcomes than there are a lot of players in this draft.
Yeah. I think it's that's probably right. Name your guy who you feel like you're maybe a little bit lower on than you've noticed compared to the draft community.
So I'll say this, and I'm glancing at my notes here. I think we talked about Rob Dillingham, and that is someone that I struggle with because I think there is a wide range of potential outcomes. I acknowledge that. Listen, if the offense clicks, like this guy could be way better than I acknowledge, but I still think there are some scenarios where it could end up not being great. The other player I will mention is and I hate doing this because he made such a jump this year, but Hunter Salas is someone that I probably won't mock in the first round. Look at the smirk over there from Boone.
I agree with you. That's. I mean, like, I think you've read all my notes here or something because I ended up moving him down.
Did I miss those? To give back the curtain here. I mean, we signed on for this, and you're like, "Yeah, I'm going to surprise you with some of these questions." I'm like, "Great."
No. I did not have notes, but I did do like a winners and losers from earlier this week. Dillingham was one who I thought was maybe a loser and ended up being a little bit lower than maybe consensus. And same with Hunter Salas. So let's hear your case on Hunter Salas and prove me right why I'm the smartest man in the room right now.
Yeah, no, I mean you're certainly the smartest man in the room right now. I think that it's among other accolades. We should just be fair and say, but he made such a jump this year. I'm just pulling up his statistics as we talk. He shot 40% from the 3-point line, 41% if you want to round up. Last year with Gonzaga, he was at 26%, and he was at 26% as a freshman too. So is that 41% from the 3-point line? Is that indicative of where he is at and representative of what we can expect in future years? Or is that a little bit of just an isolated thing? I mean, he's been a solid free throw shooter, 77% from the career, but you're really banking on the shooting. And what I question about him is the upside, because for all of the confidence that Steve Forbes and Wake Forest pumped into him this year and allowed him to play with, when it came to like reads and passing decisions and things like that, that's where I have some questions, in terms of like seeing things a second too late. And if the shooting doesn't hold up to the level where you are where that is a weapon in the NBA game, and there are questions about whether or not you can play second side pick and roll, like, you better find some ways to contribute offensively. So when you're talking about like the late first round, there's, you got players like Cam Christie, who, let's be clear, were not nearly as good this year as Hunter Salas. But if Hunter Salas's ceiling isn't that much higher than what we saw this year in college, I guess my question is like, is that player good enough to make an impact on an NBA team? Because that's where I could see like taking a flyer on some guys like Christie, who have a wider range of potential outcomes, but where the upside is higher. And you say, you know what, if he hits, he's going to be better. And if he doesn't hit, well, like, I don't know how, I don't know what the ceiling is for Salas either. Now, let me preface this by saying I hate these conversations. I hate like the publicizing who I'm more skeptical of. And I hope that he proves me totally wrong. And he's a 42% career 3-point shooter. He's playing second side pick and roll. And I would be the first one to be like, hey, I was wrong, Reed Shepherd style. Good for you, my man.
Yeah, no, and to be clear, like we're not saying Hunter Salas is not an NBA player. Exactly. At this point,
I just don't
the draft. Yeah, like I think, kind of back to your point earlier, like you can throw 20 to 35 kind of in a hat and you could draft them however which way. It's almost like just pick your flavor. I think Salas is probably a little bit lower in that range for me. But I think we're kind of splitting hairs at this point. Like he's an NBA player. It's just a matter of, is he like a top 30 prospect in this class? Like maybe not. But I'm certainly rooting for him as a person. And I think the growth that he's shown, from Gonzaga to Wake Forest, like there's a lot to like there still. So,
celebrating that growth, celebrating the resurgence in his stock, and then just kind of wondering what the upside is where I'm at with it.
Yeah. So we'll see. Please don't old takes expose us, Hunter Salas. We love your game. We just we have to talk about all of these, and maybe it's a little bit of an uncomfortable conversation, and we can circle back and kind of follow this trajectory. But right now, yeah, like that's maybe a guy who we have a little bit lower than consensus, and I think coming out of Combine Week, that may be like closer to how the community reacts to his draft stock as well. So will be an interesting one to follow. Fink, we've already taken 40 minutes. That is it for today, my man. If you are listening on YouTube, please go subscribe to the CBS Sports College Basketball YouTube page. Give Fink a follow on Twitter at Adam Finklestein. Give me a follow at Kyle DeBoone. And hopefully we'll be doing a couple of these leading up to the draft over the next month. More Bronny James talk. Maybe we'll talk about some Zach Edey. Maybe we'll talk about, I don't know. There's a lot to talk about, all right? And we will hit on all those topics. Thank you for listening, and we will see you again next time.